everybody, and welcome back to the final edition of the Press Enterprise High School Football Video Podcast. I am sports editor Tim Hare, and I am here with Adam Roberts, and we're going to talk some state championship football.
I'm ready for chocolate.
I'm ready for some chocolate. Obviously, the game this week, Southern Columbia gets Whitfield champion Steel Valley tomorrow, Saturday, at 11 o'clock at Hershey Park Stadium, and I think the big thing that when you talk about this game is that Southern, for maybe the first time since they played Clairton in 2011, is a decided underdog. You look online, a lot of predicted scores, in the range of 48-14. I looked at Penn Live; they picked Steel Valley to win by 4 touchdowns. Do you think this will be a competitive game?
I think so. I think coaching, and you look at years past, has always set Southern apart from other teams. Regardless from the best player on the team to maybe the player, I don't want to call it the weakest link, but the player that may other teams may try to expose, he always has those guys coached up and ready to play football. And it's interesting though, every year how it's the East versus the West. Always seems like it's that speed versus power style of at least in terms of the teams that Southern has played. And another thing that's particularly difficult to gauge is, how good either team is. Because Southern, is limited. They play in the East, and Steel Valley only plays in the West. So it's rare to have those crossovers.
And not only that, but and I remember in 2011 when I made the point that, because that was another case where people thought, Clairton had won 2 straight state titles, and they thought Clairton was going to sort of blow Southern out of the water. And I remember making the point that Clairton only played schools that were the same size as them, whereas Southern plays the Selinsgroves. This year they played Montoursville. And it's very similar this year, where Steel Valley didn't play anyone bigger than 2A, except one team they played was 3A. Whereas Southern in the regular season, they played 4 schools of equivalent size. They played, I think it was 4 3As. You had Montoursville and Danville. And they played 2 4As because they played Shamokin and Selinsgrove.
I think that point you make there is pretty interesting because Southern didn't go out of their way to schedule higher class teams this year.
Well, traditionally they do try to play.
No, but those are teams that have been on the schedule like last year.
Oh, sure.
So when you look at a team like Steel Valley, have the fact that all those teams are still AA teams. You know what I mean? Like none of those teams really made that jump to AAA, got bumped up in their classifications.
Right.
So, when I was talking to reporters from out west, one of the things that they specifically mentioned, other than how good Steel Valley was that they had the most to gain and had the most advantage with the new classification system.
Sure, because Aliquippa went up to 3A, so that right there is a traditional power that you're not going to have to face. And Steel Valley was also, because this was a very good team last year, Steel Valley. Mm-hmm. I remember I was watching them against South Fayette in the Whitfield playoffs, because I think it was on Root TV. And I remember being struck by how good they were. And that was a team that didn't even have Paris Ford, because he was at Seton LaSalle last year.
Yeah.
So you add a kid who's one of the top recruits in the state. He's going to Pitt, and you put that threat on the outside, and I think you see how it's opened things up for Dwayne Murray to have a 2,000-yard year. It's just ridiculous to take a team that brought a lot back and add someone like Paris Ford. That really put them over the top.
Yeah, I think if you look at skill set, athletic ability, speed, Steel Valley, no question, has it all. If are they going to be able to put it all on the field in the state title game and play a real complete team game, which it seems like Southern really forces teams to do.
Yes.
When you have those breakdowns, and Southern, fortunately for them, has been on the better side of that in the turnover margin. Hasn't had those turnovers. You look at just in the last 2 games in the playoffs here. These other teams, high snaps, bad snaps. If they were to turn that around, everybody talks about the turnover margin, but they could have been different football games. So I think that is really going to come down to the difference in this game.
And I do wonder because Steel Valley, they call them the Mercy Boys because they're the first team in Whitfield history to win every game by mercy rule. You have to wonder if Southern gets a lead, how does Steel Valley respond? Because this is a team that's not used to playing from behind.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a gut check for them. But the first thing that, if that happens, Southern's going to have to do is stop them on special teams. With that type of speed,
Ford is a weapon. I think it's 4 punt returns for a touchdown. I can't imagine any scenario where they kick to Paris Ford.
Yeah, so even if Southern does go up and score like that, you got to be very wary of still these athletes getting the ball and returning a quick, which in my opinion, pick sixes in special teams scores are the most devastating scores in the football game.
Sure, and I mean, especially a pick six. I mean,
that just takes the life right out of you.
I mean, you saw it when Southern did it to Schuylkill. Even though there was time left in that game, and it was a manageable game when Tegan Wilk took that pass, 50-some yards. You kind of saw Schuylkill say, well, this is over.
Yeah, I mean, and that was another good football team that played, for the most part, a complete game against Southern. The whole game, their linebackers, their defense was one of the best that Southern's faced all year. So it's going to be interesting when they face that type of speed on defense. Is Hollenbach going to be able to make those throws? He's going to have to be able to throw the ball quick and get rid of it early. He's going to have to throw receivers open. That was one of the things that Coach Roth has really been working on with him this week and in weeks past, is his anticipation. So when you have these athletic D-backs, I mean, they're going to be able to make plays on the ball.
Yeah.
So the real goal for Hollenbeck is to be able to throw the ball where these receivers can make a play and where their defensive backs can't.
Now, what do you see Southern doing? Obviously, the news broke earlier this week that leading rusher Gage Garcia broke an ankle, won't be suiting up. What do you see Southern doing with that open halfback spot?
That's really a place of a mystery, and I think only the guys over in Catawissa know what's going on there. But on paper, it looks like Thomas Manley and Julian Fleming are going to fill that void, and it's a tough void to fill. Not having Gage Garcia, the team's leading rusher, which is something to be said considering the fact that they have Hunter Thomas on the team.
Yeah, and you kind of worry without Garcia, if they don't get production from that halfback spot, you kind of have to figure Steel Valley can just try to take away Hunter Thomas, because unlike last year or years past, Southern doesn't really have that running element at quarterback. They don't really use Hollenbach that way. So it's very important that whoever is at that halfback spot presents some kind of threat that Steel Valley has to respect.
Well, that's why I thought, and even in the story that I wrote for tomorrow's edition, that I felt that the margin of error was the smallest for Stone Hollenbach, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to rely on him to make plays. And he's prepared for it. I was somewhat surprised when I was talking to Coach Roth and Stone Hollenbach about the work that he's put in the offseason. They talked about 10 type of camps that he does over the summer. One of them being the Alabama camp with Nick Saban, where he was able to throw with the ESPN's third overall recruit, and guys that Saban has his eye on, the important guys, the guys that are good. So Hollenbach certainly has those capabilities, but like you said, if they're able to, really contain Hunter Thomas, it's going to be on Hollenbach's shoulders to make plays and get the ball to receivers like Julian Fleming and Cam Young.
Now, I do like the matchup up front for Southern. A, because the line is playing very well right now. They had a very nice game last week against Ligonier Valley. But B, because Steel Valley, I think 4 of those 5 guys on the offensive front play both sides of the ball. And that's traditionally where Southern, if they have an advantage, it's wearing down teams that don't get to rest their linemen. I certainly think you saw that last year when Southern... This matchup almost reminds me of West Catholic last year. I feel like Steel Valley is very comparable just in terms of athletic skill. But I think you saw in that West Catholic game, I mean, you certainly saw it at the half, where linemen have their hands on their legs and they're huffing and puffing, and Southern's coming firing out and getting 6 and 7 yards of carry. If Southern... I think that is the path to victory for Southern. I don't think... Clearly, they don't want to throw a lot. They certainly don't want to be in third and long situations. I mean, no one does. But they want to do kind of like what they did on that opening drive last week against Ligonier, where they were just firing out. Kids were running hard and running through tacklers. And it really just sort of delivered a message early on that says, you had defensive success all year. You haven't faced an offense like this. I think that has to be the path for Southern. Run 50, 60 times, eat up clock, and if they can score early, that's huge.
Yeah, there's nothing more deflating for a defense, that's been on their heels a little bit, where a team's able to run the ball on them, and then they look over and they see fresh bodies being subbed in.
Yeah.
I mean, that almost takes the wind out of them even more. It's going to be interesting to see how, Dwayne Murray playing both sides of the football, inside linebacker and running back. How
Same with Ford.
Yeah, how he's going to respond. I like what I saw on tape of another a young linebacker they have, Todd Hill.
Oh, the sophomore.
Yeah, who has, good instincts, can really flow to the ball. Kind of reminds me a lot in the athleticism of Cal.
That's exactly what I was going to say. He's very reminiscent of Cal Halliday.
But, again, just going back to the unique combination of this game where it's always the speed versus power. And in years past, Southern has really just been a power team. But the unique part about the Southern team this year is the speed that they also have. I mean, Julian Fleming,
Thomas.
Yeah, the type of athleticism is a rare thing that Southern traditionally hasn't had. So when you're facing guys like Dwayne Murray, who bench presses over 300 pounds and squats over 500 pounds, it's an exciting game just to see, athletes match up against each other.
Yeah, what this game kind of reminds me of, and this is a little before your time, that phrase makes me sound incredibly old, is when Southern had Duquesne in 2005. Duquesne was a very athletic team. They had a player named Elijah Fields, who was a lot like Paris Ford. He was a Pitt recruit. He scored every way you could, just like Ford does. He was a receiver. They put him in the Wildcat and just tried to let him, make his way through a defense, threaten special teams. They had a 2,000-yard back named, I think it was Leighton Dunn. So the makeup statistically and athletically was very similar. And Southern kind of shut Duquesne down. Now, I think that defense for Southern in 05 was better than this defense, particularly on the defensive interior, because they had Eric Spots, who was a very good tackle,
Yep.
and a little player named Josh Marks at the other tackle.
A little player.
Yeah, little guy.
Yeah.
But I feel like in that game they had Kyle Conahan lock up on Elijah Fields and just try to play 10 on 10. And they did a similar thing to Rochester in 04, where they had Zach Allen lock on Derek Moy. And they said, we're going to play you 10 on 10. And I think they're going to do something like that tomorrow, where they say to Fleming, who did a very good job last week on Jackson Doherty,
Yeah.
they lock him on Paris Ford. They say, follow that kid into the locker room. Don't let him out of your sight.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the defense concentrate on shutting down the run, shutting down the other options in the passing game.
Well, it's not a bad philosophy. I mean, when you break down, you look at the film of last week, I think they only targeted Doherty 3 times, and that was a week after he had scored 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And he only got 1 catch out of that. So, putting the athlete versus the athlete, Fleming against Ford, it's going to be really interesting, not just to see how 2 incredibly athletic young men play, but the fact that one's a senior and one's a freshman.
Absolutely.
So it's like a little bit of a changing of the guard almost. And one of the things that I can't help but think when you look at tape, and sometimes it gets kind of downplayed, is this real speed of these young men. Like looking last week and watching Colin Smith, watching him on tape, he looked quick, but he didn't look that fast. But yet when you watched him on the field, he took strides like he was a 6'4" guy. He really moved across the field.
Like that 50-yard run, when you're on the field and you're down at field level and you just see the speed of a kid like that. You're right. It's something that you don't get in the stands. It's something you don't get if you're watching on PCN.
Yeah, and that's what I think makes Steel Valley so dangerous is the abilities to score in special teams. I think if I'm Rod Steele, I'm going to try and run some screen plays and anything to get the ball to the receivers on the outside and let them make plays. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. The play calling is.
Do you think Southern wins this game?
Um, I don't want to say that I've always been a big fan of Southern, but I've always liked the way that they've been coached and prepared. Their preparations have been second to none, and I think that's why you see them in the 15th state playoff or state final game. I'm going to go with Southern in it.
What do you see as a score?
I think I'm going to go 31 to 18.
Oh, okay. So a couple. All right. See, now in the paper, spoiler alert, I went back and forth on it all week. When Garcia was healthy, I felt that Southern was going to surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, that's an easier. I feel like an easier pick when you have all the guys.
And even with Garcia, I just kept sort of playing out, the scenario in my mind where I saw Southern winning, because I feel like this Steel Valley defense is a lot like that Ligonier defense. Not in scheme, but in that Ligonier had shut out 7 opponents and only allowed 50 some odd points, and Southern put 24 on them in the first half. Having thought about it a little more, and I know I'm going to take some flack for it, I did ultimately pick Steel Valley, but I wouldn't be surprised if Southern shocks the state.
Yeah, Hunter Thomas has been running like a man possessed the last few weeks.
He's been the best offensive threat in the post.
And it's going to really be on his shoulders as far as the running game. And, if he can play like he has the last few weeks, I could see him, helping take Southern to that next level.
What are you going to order at the Cocoa Diner?
Oh, apple pancakes, cinnamon apple pancakes.
That's what
you
you got
should too.
last year.
Yeah. You listening, if you have a chance to go do that, you should do that too.
I'm going to consider my omelet options.
Very modest. You're thinking about Popeyes later.
I do love fried chicken. I think that's going to do it for the podcast. I just made myself hungry.
Yeah.
But if you liked what you saw, please go to pressenterpriseonline.com. All the podcasts from throughout the season are on there. So if you'd like to see the progression of my facial hair throughout the year, that's a great opportunity to do so. Also, all of our previous playbooks, previous stories. We'll have live scoring updates on our scoreboard on the website, so please feel free to check all that out. We'll both be tweeting from the game tomorrow. I am at Tim Hare 87, and he is at Real Adam Roberts. So please check us out on Twitter. And I think that's going to do it. So for Adam Roberts, I'm Tim Hare, and thanks for watching these. It was a great season, and we will see you next August.